Okay, welcome to Camino 101, the Primitivo from the Northern California chapter of American Pilgrims on the Camino. My name is Guy Joaquin, and I'm zooming in today from Walnut Creek. I'm one of the coordinators for the Northern California chapter, going on about 5 years now. And I'm very excited and grateful for this opportunity to be sharing info on this magnificent Camino route. And I'm up for talking Camino anytime, anywhere, so don't hesitate to get in touch by email if any questions come up that you'd like to follow up with me after the session here. I got my Camino career started back in 2012. So I'm hoping that we'll be well into the after times, the after COVID next year, so that I can celebrate my 10-year Camino-versary, with another walk on the Camino. Joining me today is my good friend, Sue Lopez. She zoomed in from the outer sunset in the city out by the beach. You may already know her. She co-leads our annual Land's End hike and also the St. James Day walk. She's also up to answer any questions you have. Please follow up with her by email as well, if you'd like. In 2016, Sue walked the Camí Catalán that starts in Barcelona, and she included a pilgrimage to Montserrat at that time before continuing on and joining the Camino Francés in Logroño. She's also walked the Primitivo in 2019, like me, in October. In fact, we actually went together with another friend here who might be in the audience with us, Marula. And also here with us is Lori Ferris. She's zooming in from Oakland. Lori is also a Northern California chapter coordinator, and she's walked 4 Caminos: the Portuguese, Ingles. She's also walked the Primitivo, and the Invierno. That one starts in Ponferrada, off of the Camino Frances. And she'll be managing the Zoom controls and facilitating our Q&A session a bit later. So tonight's talk is part of our Camino educational series, our 101s. This collection includes a general intro to the Camino de Santiago pilgrimage. We also have a presentation on packing and gear, an all-time favorite, sometimes contentious topic. And that always includes a lively group panel discussion. We also talk about technology on the Camino, what to consider using or perhaps maybe not using. And we round out the series with a talk on the joys and challenges of returning home from the Camino, something we think we don't focus enough on. And then in between, we have overviews like these on different Camino routes. So, okay, now's the time to grab that pen and paper because dun dun dun, it's time for a pop quiz. Didn't you just love these back at school? I was contemplating kind of taking the mute off so we could hear kind of that collective groan that you get when you got these back in school of having to do a pop quiz. So I just thought we'd just have a little fun and see what you might know already about the Primitivo. So on your paper, you can jot down answers to these questions or just mentally take note of them and test yourselves. So the first one, why is it called the Primitivo? In what city does the route start? In which territory, or more officially, autonomous community, is this city located? What is this territory's traditional drink? Who was the first person to walk the route? How long is the route? And lastly, where does this route connect to the Camino Frances? So, how well do you think you know this already, or how well do you think you did? The answers, as you can guess, are found throughout the presentation. So as they say in Spain, ojo, keep an eye out. So let's tackle the first one here. Why Primitivo? So I wondered this when I first heard of the route. I bet many of you did too. I mean, Primitivo, it means primitive, right? Well, what's the first word that pops to your mind when you hear the word Primitivo?
Well.
Do you think barbaric, crude, rudimentary maybe? Do you conjure up images of Neanderthals or cave dwellers or flashback to the movie Quest for Fire? Or did you think more along the lines of ancient, original, beginning? Well, it really is the second notion is where the name comes from. Primitivo in this context means original in Spanish. So how is it the original then? Well, here's kind of the Cliff Notes Guy version. There are several versions, variations out there. But the way I have it is once upon a time, back in 814, or could have been 813, somewhere around there, there was this hermit named Pelagius. And one night he was out and about and saw some strange lights coming from the sky in a nearby forest. So curious, he followed them, and lo and behold, he stumbled across the long lost tomb of the Apostle St. James. He then and went and told the local bishop. He got on the horn to the King Alfonso II of Asturias. And at that time, this area of Spain was part of the Kingdom of Asturias. So then Alfonso, he strapped on his Osprey 40-liter backpack and his keen waterproof hiking boots, and he set out on a trek from his home in Oviedo to check things out. And I guess with his medieval DNA kit, he verified the remains as the real deal. Well, joking aside, he then had a chapel built to house the remains, and that site grew into the city of Santiago de Compostela. And the chapel, you guessed it, transformed into the magnificent cathedral. So, because of this, Alfonso is credited with being the first pilgrim of the Way of St. James. And the path that he took from Oviedo became the original Camino route, the Primitivo. So that's really kind of my down and dirty version. So now that we know the backstory, let's focus more on the practicalities of walking the route, starting with when is the best time to go. So if this is not the top FAQ, it's really one of the top for sure. And almost no matter what the route, people are asking when is the best time to go. And it's a tough one to give a clear answer to. There's climate, weather, spring swings. Um, we also travel over an extended period of time, so there's bound to be a mix of conditions. But kind of generally speaking, April to October is sort of that Camino season. In general, our albergues start to reopen in March, start winding down maybe late October and November. So by April, hopefully the winter snow has hopefully all melted away and won't return until maybe November and December. So it's kind of in that window of April to October. Summer on the Primitivo, I didn't walk in the summer, but I've heard enough stories from pilgrims who have walked in the months of July and August, especially that it can be a bit of a bed race. Um, it is gaining a little bit in popularity, but there is, not the quiet amount of accommodations that you'd find definitely on the amount of accommodations that you definitely find on the Frances. So, enough stories I heard of pilgrims who are arriving even early in the afternoon in a few stops, and maybe having to continue on into the next stop. Um, if they are trying to book into private accommodations, online, they might be seeing a lot of them have been filled already. So, if you have the flexibility, I'd say, really try the spring or the fall, kind of the April, May, maybe even early June or late September and then into October, which again is when we went. And, just some things to consider when you're thinking about these bookend months. Of course, as you're getting closer to March or coming out of winter, it is kind of, might still be some rain, bit of rain, and this is Asturias and Galicia where it does just generally rain more often. So there still might be some muddy conditions for you there. Foliage, of course, if you're in the spring, you're getting, kind of the trees are coming and flowers are coming into bloom. Although these, in the fall, it's still pretty green. You're seeing a photo here, as you can see, but, there are the deciduous trees, and, you just have that contrast with the trees, those trees losing their leaves. Um, as you get towards these corner bookend months, you might want to be thinking about the amount of daylight that you have. The days are just shorter. But in my experience, I was never walking in the dark in October. There's plenty of time for me to get into town, but it isn't those nice long days of summer where you're just out on a cafe, on the terrace, and it's still 9:30, and the sun is still out there for you. And again, in those, extreme kind of bookend months, April, October, the albergues are starting to wind down. Um, we never encountered albergues that had been closed, although I did hear of a couple of location or one location where the albergues were kind of coordinating with each other, and one would start to shut down since the numbers were going down, so they could kind of take some time off. So again, just some things to kind of keep in mind with the time to go. If you're trying to think about the numbers of the weather condition, here's a chart of average temps, rain, sunny days in Oviedo. And, I just say it's kind of safe to just reference these numbers for the rest of the route. Kind of highlighted the ones in these, in that kind of quote unquote Camino season. Temperatures on the average, pretty mild, in this area, low 60s to low 70s from April to October. My experience, it's about that. There was some sun that came out some days, but it was a very, very good walking conditions for October when I went. In terms of rain, hey, it's Asturias and Galicia, and they're super green for a reason, because they get a fair amount of rain. And it also is a very mountainous region. Definitely all through Asturias is, through the mountains on this route. And you do have the Atlantic Ocean nearby, and that's kind of churning up those clouds. So there's just not that many kind of hours of, clear skies and sunlight that you have, with locations further south or nearer to the Mediterranean. So how popular is the route? Well, if when is the best time to go is a top FAQ, then this must really come right behind that. Put another way, we're kind of asking, how busy, quote unquote, is the route? So here are the stats from the Pilgrim's Office in 2019. Keep in mind that these numbers are based on pilgrims who kind of check into the office and get their Compostela or certificate of completion. Not all pilgrims check into the office, and not all pilgrims make their way all the way to Santiago. So the Primitivo, if you're looking at the order, is the sixth most popular route after the Frances Portuguese, and that's the Portuguese Central, and the Portuguese Coastal, Norte, and then it comes after the Ingles. So it only really accounts for 4.5% of the total pilgrims who, again, make it in and check in at the Pilgrim's Office. When we walked in October, I'd say it was perfectly fine in my, opinion. Never ran in to more than a handful of pilgrims during the day, sometimes not at all. But there was really, enough around to still get that pilgrim camaraderie at the stops along the way, at the albergues, when you're out having dinner, meeting up with other pilgrims as well. So how to get to Oviedo to start? I think it's pretty easy. It's, I think, pretty just easy in general to get around Europe on public transportation in general, anyway. But here are your options. You can fly into Madrid or Barcelona. And once you're in country, you can get another flight to Oviedo. Vueling in Iberia are two that fly into Oviedo Airport. And then from the airport, there's an easy bus shuttle to the Oviedo bus and train station, which is more, in the city proper. It's only about, if I remember, 30 minutes or so of a bus ride. They leave hourly. Um, and then from the bus train station, you can really walk into the city center. It's just about a mile or so, 20 minutes of walking to the cathedral. There's also the bus and train options to get to Oviedo Station. And if you don't know it already, RoamToRio.com is a great resource online to go to map out your transportation routes. You just punch in your origin and destination locations, and it will give you all the options and even the combination of transportation modes to get you to where you want to go. So a very good resource. You also have the same options if you want, when you get away from Santiago, to get back to your departure point. You can take planes, trains, automobiles, and buses. Use Rome to Rio again, to map that out and figure that one out. In my case, I took a bus to Ponferrada first to visit a friend that from our chapter that had moved there. And then from there, I took an overnight train back to Barcelona to catch my flight back to Oakland. How long is it? So different sources, different numbers. Some say 200 miles, others say 220. I think the difference really because some pilgrims veer off of the Camino del Norte and walk a few days to Oviedo and then take the Primitivo onto Santiago. We'll talk about that option a little bit later. My calculation of my Camino was 190 miles, so that's what I'm going with. Just to compare it with some other Camino routes of similar length, you have the Camino Portugues Central from Porto, and that's about 150 miles. The Camino Inglés from Ferrol, it's about 70 miles. And for the Primitivo, it's pretty consistent from what I've seen that it takes 12 to 14 days. We took 13 days, and that was no rest days. And then for me, my average was about 14 miles a day. The longest one was 20 miles, and then the shortest one, 9 miles. So for specifically the Primitivo, this must be the top FAQ. The route has the reputation of being the toughest of at least all the major routes in Spain and Portugal. But, is it really? I think, with a lot of things, it just depends, and it's a kind of subjective. Here are just a few points to think about. It's not nearly as long as the Frances or the Norte. Those you're out on the road for 5, 6, maybe 7 weeks. Here, you can get it in under 2 weeks. I'd also say that since it's in the mountains, there's not as much hard surface walking. Hard surface walking is, from city streets to sidewalks to the cobblestone villages that you see on the Portuguese, especially from Lisbon to Porto. And, again, you're in the mountains, so not as much, of that heat threat that you might have, say, in the summer on the Via de la Plata or even on the Meseta on the Frances. But for sure, the Primitivo is a game of chutes and ladders. It's ups and downs all the way to Lugo, which is, maybe about 2/3 of the way in, where it then kind of flattens out a bit, relatively speaking, to Santiago. What you see here is really the most dramatic map from my guidebook. And so you can see all of the, ups and downs and micro ups and downs on the map. And, just about every map in the book is somewhat similar. But most I'd say are short and medium sprints. It's not like you're climbing the Pyrenees on the Frances or O Sobreiro on every day, or if you think of peaks locally like Diablo or Mount Tam or Mission Peak, it's not like you're doing that every day. You might have one of those in there, and then you're just kind of, doing those ups and downs all day long. But they're short sprints. So here's what I'll say. Again, it's my humble opinion. Um, in terms of number of ascents and descents over time, it is about 30,000 feet of elevation gain in those 12 to 14 days, and some of them are steep. So in those sense, arguably maybe yes, it's definitely a hard route. But inarguably, it's not a walk in the park. But as you saw with the stats that you just saw, thousands walk it every year. Okay, so this one is a form of, how easy it is to get lost, or can you get lost? Well, on the Frances, because it's the Frances, it's signage galore. On the Primitivo, it's adequate, and I don't mean as adequate and as it's okay. It's adequate as it's fine. It's enough. You have the yellow arrows, you have the signs pointing out the way, both official and the unofficial ones out there. You also have the mojones, or the markers, like this one here in the photo. Um, but here's something important to note about these markers. This is the one at a fork in the road where you have to decide which way to go, to Hospitalis, that's the one up top, the tile up top, or to La Pola below. So the question is, do you go right or do you go left? What do you think? So, raise your hand to the screen if you think you go left to Hospitalis and right to Pola. All right, you can put your hands down. Now raise your hand if you think you go right to Hospitalis and left to Pola. Okay, well, the answer is you go right to Hospitalis and then left if you want to go to Pola. So in Asturias, the hinge, or where the rays of the shell come together, indicate the direction. But once you cross over into Galicia from Asturias, it's the reverse. And I think it's how it is for the rest of the Caminos, certainly the Portuguese and the Frances. So just, something unique, a little peculiar about this route. Guidebooks, which one to get? Well, I was reared on the John Brierley guides for the Frances and the Portuguese, so I was really used to that format, but there's not one for the Primitivo, at least that I know of yet, or when I walked. But these are some of the English language ones most often used. I brought along the Wise Pilgrim guidebook, this purple one, and like the signage, it's adequate. Basic descriptions and maps, it gets the job done. There's no frills, there's no spiritual exercises or history or cultural overviews like the Brierleys. Um, you can go paperless if you want. There's an app for that. Wise Pilgrim puts out not only an app for the Primitivo, but many others as well. Very easy to use, I thought. And then there's also the Grons website, grons.com. And this is a great site for basic info on many Camino routes. And they also maintain a pretty up-to-date listing of the albergues along the way, both the public and the private ones. So a really good resource. Costs. So I'll run through a few ranges of some common costs on the Camino. And, just to point out again, they're based on my own experience. I'd say if you've done the Camino before, the prices are pretty much the same as other routes in Spain and even in Portugal. Some things may be a little bit more, some a little bit less, but all in all, about the same, comparable. So accommodation wise, the public hostels, municipales, 5 to 6 euros. Then you got your private options, private hostels, 10 to 12. You can grab a private room, 20 or more. You have some hotel options in the big cities, 30 to 50. Kind of along the food route, or some services. If you get a meal for lunch, a menu, 10 to 12 euros. food supplies. If you go to the market, grab your lunch like I did, 8 to 10 euros. And the important coffee, beer, wine, you're really looking at 1 to 2 euros there. And if you get your laundry done, 3 to 6, more on the higher end if you get it dried as well. So in my opinion, kind of when you think about daily costs, minimum looking at 20 to 25 euros, average 30 to 40 euros. If you really want to live large, you can go 45 and on up. For me, I think I was really average, in that average range, kind of pulling in a couple of the days where I splurged a bit and moved into the luxury range. Um, and you can just kind of keep in mind, just generally speaking, you can take that €1 equals about $10, $20. And something I just want to note here, besides the Hospitalis route that we'll talk about a little bit later, there's an adequate amount of bars, cafes, and restaurants and markets along the way. I didn't, so I don't think you have to worry about, not finding a place to eat along the way or not picking up something up or running out of water. There's plenty of enough amenities along the way to keep you going. So this is one of my best surprises on the Primitivo, the variety and quality of the accommodations. My preconceived notion, rustic route, rustic villages equals rustic accommodations. And that's not rustic in the quaint sort of way. But here again, no need to worry. You got plenty of municipal albergues with all the typical creature comforts, including the requisite squeaky metal bunks. But seriously, I found them very adequate, very clean. You also have plenty of private albergues there. And here I was surprised. I mean, they're pretty new. And, with the experience of these hospitaleros and hosts there, they've really thought things out of all those things that pilgrims like to have in an albergue. There's also private rooms available on the way. One of the good friends that I walked with, that was how he rolled. He was not into the communal living every way. He get into a town and he went off to his private room that he had booked. Hotels, you'll just pretty much see those in the big cities, and there's really just two on the Primitivo, Oviedo, and in Lugo. As far as I know, there's no paradores, those historical buildings that are converted over into hotels. And if you do, want to book any of these kind of private accommodations, booking.com is the way to go. And probably once we're able to return to the Camino, the albergues are starting to get onto the reservation system. So keep on top of what those developments are. Through to Lugo, I stayed in all albergues, mostly private, a few municipals in there. And in October, never had a need to book, kind of just rolled into town and was able to get a bed, no problem. What about knowing Spanish? Do you need to? Well, not necessarily, but of course, knowing some basics will just make for a richer experience. No one says, I wish I knew less Spanish coming back from the Camino. He kind of goes along with the other list of things you never hear from pilgrims, like, I wish I brought more stuff, or I should have walked faster. I'll point out that you can download a copy of our basic Spanish for the Camino handbook. That's available on our chapter page on the AmericanPilgrims.org website. And of course, you can get an app. Google Translate, iTranslate, TripLingo are, I think, three of the most popular types of apps you can install on your phone or on your device. So of course, we're going to talk about the food and drinks. This is something that pilgrims can always talk about. So yes, you can find the classic Camino fare, the Menú del Días, where you get your kind of appetizer, main, a dessert, and your choice of water or wine, like on the other routes. They range widely in quality and variety. I did find, and I got my tortilla española there. You can also get the bocadillos with the great bread that kind of cheese rips out the top of your mouth. Um, Empanadas, and of course, you can get your café con leches there. If you have some extra euros, definitely go beyond and seek out some of those regional specialties. If I saw seafood, I got it. Trout, shellfish. I had baby eels for the first time. Pulpo or octopus is also popular here in Asturias as it is in Galicia. I even had rabbit for one day for lunch. Um, and here's some other Asturian foods to look out for. Fabada. This is probably the most famous Asturian dish. It's made with pork shoulder, bacon, black pudding, chorizo, smoked paprika. It's a real stick to your rib stew. The stars, though, are the beans, les fabes. It's a specific type of bean grown in Asturias. So, although wine is also produced in Asturias, cider or sidra is top of the pops here. It's pretty inexpensive, about €3 a bottle, low alcohol content, 6% or so. But it's, I think, some pretty good stuff. It's not that kind of sweet apple juice cider type. It's actually kind of musty, a little bit, some say barnyardy, which sounds weird, but it really is what makes it unique. It's definitely worth a visit to a cider bar, a cideria, especially in Oviedo, where there are several in the city center. But probably the most famous aspect of Asturian cider is how it's poured. It's quite an entertaining process. It's really a performance. So straight out of the bottle, Sidra is pretty flat. So to give it some oomph, it's poured from high above your head to the glass, which is held down low, and this will kind of add some bubbles and froth it up. And you only pour a small amount at a time, culete, and it's meant to be drunk kind of in one gulp before the effervescence dissipates. And let's not forget about the sweets. There are a lot in Asturias. I don't know the history of it, but Asturias is known for rice pudding, arroz con leche. There's even a rice pudding festival every year in May. Like most things, some are good, some not so good. Definitely order it if you see it and it's house made. Look out for the word casero after it on a menu. Um, Frijuelos, which are on the left there in the photo, are crepes, and they're dusted with sugar, but they also could be filled with hazelnut spread, cream, or marmalade. And then on the right are quesadillas, and this is fried dough. And that's filled with nuts, honey, or sometimes just sugar. Okay, now that your stomachs are probably growling, how about the credential for getting your stamps along the way? Well, you can get your credential from us, American Pilgrims on the Camino, of course. You can request one for free at the AmericanPilgrims.org website. But in Spain, you can get it at the cathedral in Oviedo. If you get it there, ask about the special entry into the Oviedo Cathedral for pilgrims. You can also get it at the tourist office, which is nearby in the city center there. Because this is a double header, dual holy year, 2021, 2022, there is a special credential that's been issued by the cathedral, and that's available online to order from Casa Ivar at santiagodecompostela.me. And just to point out that Lugo is the minimum starting point for walking to qualify for the Compostela or certification of completion of the Camino. Options. All right, let's run through a few options that you have on the Primitivo. Mentioned this a bit earlier. The first is to veer off of the Camino del Norte, which runs along the coast. And you can opt to break away and head inland at Via Viciosa to finish up on the Primitivo. And it's about 30 miles or so from Villa Viciosa to Oviedo. Another is to start your Camino Primitivo with the Camino San Salvador. This is a route that starts from León on the Frances and heads north to Oviedo. And this is a way for pilgrims to visit the San Salvador Cathedral in Oviedo and see the Holy Shroud that is said to have covered the face of Jesus at his crucifixion. So this is where the saying comes from, quien va a Santiago y no al Salvador, visita al lacayo y no al Señor. He who goes to Santiago and not to San Salvador visits the servant and not the Lord. Kind of cool how that rhymes in both languages. But anyways, this Camino is about 75 miles long, and they say takes 5 to 7 days. But it's all pure mountains and said to be much tougher than the Primitivo. In Oviedo, be sure to visit the church of Santa Maria del Naranco. It's about 2 miles from the city center on a hillside. It's not directly on the Camino, but some pilgrims tack it onto their first stage or visit it on a day before starting out. This building was completed in the year 842 by Ramiro I, and it was first a recreational palace, a sort of vacation home away from the city, and later it was then converted into a church. For you architecture buffs out there, it's cited as a fine example of the pre-Romanesque style. It's an impressive structure for sure, but the grounds are also fantastic for a picnic lunch or an afternoon nap, which is exactly what we did on the day that we visited. Okay, so there's one major decision that all Primitivo pilgrims must make. It's, do you take the Pola route or the Hospitalis route? So after about the third stage or so, you run into that marker that we saw earlier, and you'll have to make your choice. It's like choosing the red pill or the blue pill that's in the movie The Matrix. The Pola route is sort of the low road. You descend into the town of Pola de Allande, where there are full services with accommodations, but you do then have to make the climb back up the mountain where you meet the Hospitalis route and then continue on together. The Hospitalis route is then sort of the high road, since it stays up on the mountainside and goes even higher. And whereas you can do the Pola route in 2 stages, you got to do the Hospitalis in 1 shot. There's no amenities along the way to stay. I took the Pola route and thought it was wonderful, as is all of the Primitivo. And also, still challenging, with that climb back up the mountain. But the Hospitalis route gets the most recognition because of the elevation and the terrain, the views, as well as the history behind it. So I'm going to turn it over at this point to Sue, because she took the Hospitalis route, and she'll give us some more info and give us a glimpse of what it looks like.
So thanks for joining us this evening. I'm here with my support staff and husband, Luis. And Luis did not join me on the Primitivo, but we did do the Camí Catalán and the Frances together a few years back. But this time, as Guy said, it was myself and Guy and Marula, who I think is in attendance this evening, who set out from the Bay Area together. And then, we met other people. We ended up not walking together too much. Marula and I stayed together pretty much, but Guy had some folks he'd met. We had other folks we met, and like happens in the Camino, they ended up doing the La Pola route, and we did the Hospitalis route. So I'm just going to share our story for those 2 days and some of the photos to give you a sense of what that route looks like. On day 4, you're leaving from the town of Teneo, and the book is suggesting that you're going all the way to Borres, a town called Borres. And we knew that if we went about an extra 1.5 miles, we'd go to a very, very small town called Samblismo, Samblismo. I was using the Village to Village map guide, Camino Primitivo book. I don't know if that's showing up. I got my trusty hat on because we have our interrogation light above our desk this evening. But this was gifted to me by another Camino friend who's in attendance tonight, Adelina. And so we had learned that at San Blismo, we could get a little bit more on the route and get off of like being in town, be more in the outskirts. So we opted to do that, Marula and myself. And right where that albergue was this one of these markers that Guy was talking about. And then, okay, how do we get? There is my compañera, Marula, standing here, where we were making our decision. And I think I was recalling that we were kind of leaning towards going the lower route. We'd already split from Guy, so we didn't know which way they were going, Guy and the folks he was walking with. But I think Marula and I were leaning towards doing the lower route. But we found this lovely albergue called the Albergue San Blismo. And if you take the Primitivo, if you decide to do it, this is a really exceptional, very small and cozy place run by a vegetarian Catalan from the Barcelona area. I think he can only fit maybe 10 to 12 people in his place. He cooks veggie meals, which is always a treat when you're on the Camino. And he is right here. That is Xavi. And this is our group of folks that we were traveling with. And the ones that we were most often with was our friend from Great Britain, Mick, our Russian angel, Tatiana, and here's Marula, and the rest that we'd met along the way as well. So that evening when we were at dinner, our trusty guide, our host, Xavi, had said, well, what are you guys gonna do tomorrow morning? And I said, well, we're probably gonna go to the lower route because it seems like it'll be less challenging than going up the mountain. And he pulled out this information that I'm sharing with you right now. And basically, this is Borres here, which is the guidebook suggests you go there. If you go the little further, you're in San Blismo, and that's where his albergue was. And he says, if you go up, if you have good weather, there's no reason not to go up. And there should be good weather tomorrow. Good weather means it's not gonna be windy and rainy. It might be overcast, and that's fine, because he said it's a much easier route. And the more that I read about it, the route is shorter than what Guy and their group had ended up doing. It's actually, we ended up doing a total of about 15 miles. There are no services, as you know, was mentioned. They're both beautiful routes, but we actually had an easier, what I'm reading is an easier ascent. So the elevation that you're doing is not as difficult as the up and down that you can see here, right? We were just going like this gentle climb, and the views are spectacular. So basically he convinced all of us to go ahead that next morning. He says, if you've got the weather on your side, you've got to do the Hospitales. And he succeeded in convincing us to do it. And let's see, there we are taking off from his place. The views very quickly become very, very nice. And I'm sure they were very nice on Guy's route as well, on the lower route, but we continued to climb a little bit. And these are my trusty trio I was traveling with, Marula at the front, and here are our two Italian friends that had quickly got quite a bit faster than us. We kept on going. It was a full day hike straight up into the mountains. The views are just fantastic. It's a really, really lovely day. It was definitely the highlight of our trip, or of my trip, I should say. I think the pluses of this route is getting off of the roads, the sidewalks, the towns. You're basically just out in the mountains and the pastures, enjoying such nice views, just really peaceful, lovely day. We were just up in the clouds, like being up in Mount Tam. And these are one of the ruins. I don't have the names. I don't have them labeled, and I should have asked Marula if she had labeled photographs of the 3 ruins, but there are 3 ruins, and that's why it's called the Hospitales, the ruins of the 3 old hospitales that used to be up there. They're Paradilla, Fonfaraón, and Valparaíso. So this was one of them, and I think I had another photo. Our friend Mick from Great Britain had said that it very much reminded him of Wales. So he wanted me to photograph him here at the top. And this is one of my favorite photographs that Mick took of the three ladies looking down. Again, it was just, once you're up at the top, you're just going straight. We didn't have a very windy day. It was overcast, but it was totally manageable. Lots of animals. And then we started our descent, so we started going down quite a bit. This was, one of the chapels that we hit, and Marula and my walking sticks together, rooftops. Again, just very lovely views. More ruins. And there we are at the end. Happy campers. So that's what I have to share with you guys. And if you wanted any more information about that route that we had done, I would definitely, maybe I'll write in chat the name of the albergue and the little town that we were at before we took off. But I would not let it deter you. I was told there were some Camino people in this group that had actually put the fear of God into me about this route. Folks that told me that they were descending mountains and incredible views and crying because their knees hurt so much. But we're in the Bay Area and we're used to ups and downs and ups and downs. And I think for both Marula and I, it was a fine trip. It was totally manageable. Maybe that fear made us feel like it wasn't so bad, because that day was supposed to be like the hardest, and it was completely manageable for us. And it was spectacular. Maybe we were distracted by the beauty and the wonderful company. But I hope you guys consider doing that one day. It's definitely worth it, and I would definitely do it again. So thank you, Guy, for having me join in today. And you guys let me know if you have any specific questions about that.
Thank you, Sue. This was great, just kind of reliving it again. I mean, I know you showed me your photos and when we finished up, and I'm glad you did show those, because it really does give the audience here a good glimpse into how just lush and just amazing the Primitivo route is. Okay, well, soldiering on here. Lugo. Well, this is not so much really an option. You have to go through Lugo. This is just more of a highlight. Lugo is the oldest city in Galicia, and by this time you've crossed over from Asturias, and it's the only other big city, as I mentioned earlier, on the Primitivo besides Oviedo. You get, so after all those kind of mountain villages, you really get back into that Spanish town feeling with the narrow kind of cobblestone streets, the big plaza, the cathedral, the nightlife. It's a really good place to take a rest day if you want to. The old city center is fully enclosed within a Roman wall, and it's apparently the only Roman wall in the world that has the perimeter fully intact. It was built between 263 and 276 with millions of slate and granite stones to defend the Roman town of Lucus Augusti, named after Caesar Augustus. It's about 1.5 miles long and 30 feet high, and there are 10 gates with 71 of 85 towers are still standing, either fully or partially. And you can even walk around the top of it. And I think Marula did that with Sue. Went around the perimeter, as much of the perimeter that you can walk. So the Primitivo connects into the Frances at Melide. Ding, 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 ding. That was one of the questions from our pop quiz. That's a freebie there for you. I think it used to connect at a stage earlier in Palas de Rey. But anyway, at that point, you can really be hit with a tidal wave of pilgrims on the Frances, and it can be quite a shock, especially if you're a first timer. It was with the first timers that I was walking with, and even me, even having walked the Frances before, because it is a bit jarring, or can be. But there is a way to delay joining the Frances. From Lugo, you can take an alternate path, the Camino Verde, to join the last leg of the Camino del Norte at Sobrado, and then join at Arthua. You can just go ahead and Google Lugo to Sobrado or the Camino Verde for the directions. They're out there on the web. And I've heard there's even a way to go even further to join at Lavacoya, which is part of the very last stretch, 6 miles or so into Santiago. So it's kind of out there by the airport of Santiago. Can you ship your pack ahead? Yes, you can. Here are a couple of outfits that can help you with that. It's about um, €5 a day. And generally the procedure is that you just drop it off, at the place that you stayed at, the albergue, or at 8 a.m. or before 8 a.m. And then it's delivered to the place that you're headed to by 2:30 or so. So how about making the Primitivo your first Camino? Sure. You already kind of heard me speak of some first timers. Two of the, a lot of the, I think most of the people that we met, Sue might be able to correct me or corroborate me. I mean, most of the people we met on the Primitivo, it was their first Camino, um, which kind of surprised me. But hey, but just thinking about it, some few points to keep in mind. Definitely, have some hiking experience on it. And like Sue said, we have so many great opportunities out here in the Bay Area to get on the trails here. It's definitely more solitude out there. There's just less pilgrims out there. You saw that Hospitalis route. No one else but Sue and Marula and Mick and Tatiana out there. And it's not the Frances. So if you're looking for that classic Camino experience with the Basque Country and the Meseta, all those landmarks of the big cities with Burgos and Leon, the Cruz de Ferro, all those kind of classic things. There's a lot of history on this, as you can see, being um, the first Camino, quote unquote. But it's not the Frances. And even though you can get by without Spanish, one of the friends I was walking with, didn't really know a lick of Spanish, but he managed to get by and do on his own and make reservations. But I think you'll always hear us plug. Knowing Spanish is very helpful. So here's a question: would I do it again? Heck yeah, I would do it again. Thinking about it, I'd love to start with the Camino San Salvador, really kind of get that do that challenging route from Leon. I took the Pola route. Sue took the Hospitalis route. I'd like to check that out. And just, as usual, doing it again, there are towns that I walked by and I kind of thought I'd like to maybe check that out. So I saw some quick recommendations in chat there. Here's one of a town that I'd like to maybe check out, San Juan de Villapañada. I heard there's a pretty eccentric hospitalero that manages the albergue there. That sounds pretty intriguing. But I think I'd actually just finish up in Lugo, spend a day there. We didn't take any rest days on this route. Be able to walk. I didn't walk around the wall of the city, so I'd like to check that out. Okay, well that about winds it up. Those are the nuts and bolts of the Camino Primitivo. I hope our presentation has given you a good understanding of this really spectacular route, and that the info is useful to you if you decide or plan to walk it. Again, don't hesitate to get in touch with us if you have any questions regarding the route after tonight, or the Camino in general, or our chapter, or perhaps the American Pilgrims Organization. We're here to help. So until next time, take care of yourselves, and we'll see you in an upcoming event.